Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of The Global Guys. This week we have Louis Morris from LGM Aviation, who's going to talk to us about the future of aviation. So, Louis, tell us a little bit about yourself and the company you work for.
Thank you, guys. Well, first of all, having seen some of your previous episodes, I hope I can enlighten you with the sort of glamorous world of aircraft maintenance. Got a lot to live up to after DJ Spoonie, but I'll try and do my best. But I'm the founder and managing director of LGM Aviation. I started out my career in the RAF as a trainee pilot at university, and after 3 years sort of learning to fly, I actually I decided it. I liked flying, but I didn't enjoy being told what to do. So that side of it wasn't for me really. And ended up in London and did a brief stint, all things working in IT recruitment, which I wasn't particularly good at nor interested in all honesty. And yeah, after doing that, I got into the kind of less glamorous side of aviation, which is aircraft maintenance and that side of it, and worked for two of the leading independent global maintenance, repair and overhaul (MRO) companies in the industry, one in the UK and one in the USA in Miami. And after a number of years, set up the company in 2017, and been sort of busy ever since.
Good. What an interesting journey as well. So I guess with this question about how have you found the aviation industry change over the last decade, that's obviously resulted in you setting up your own company as well and getting on that journey. So how have you found it? What the changes from the last 10 years?
Yeah, so I think the biggest changes, you'd probably be forgiven for thinking that commercial aviation is just like a hub of technology, and absolutely, the technology in the actual aircraft and the engines and things, of course, is second to none. But as an industry, we've really sort of been lagging and behind the times for years on the sort of day-to-day kind of technology. Friends of mine that I've brought in to sort of partner with and business interests and things over the years have sort of been, I tell them, but they don't believe it until they see it for themselves, how archaic actually the aviation industry is in a number of ways.
They never got a long-haul plane before. I'm sure those players on there are archaic.
Well, no, as I say, the technology in the aircraft is not archaic, of course, but it's just the rise of these things. You can now, obviously, over the last 10 years, download a boarding pass on here, go through security, buy a beer, buy your food, get an Uber to your hotel, book a hotel, all the rest of it with one of these. And I think that has fundamentally changed things, both on the consumer side, how things kind of are bought and sold, but also we're now decades behind other industries in terms of, in my side of things, buying and selling of parts is all, there's a huge amount of human interaction still needed, well, not necessarily needed, but preferred by suppliers, and as you'd hope and expect, there's a lot of quality and paperwork that goes with supplying aircraft parts, so there's big things in terms of paper trails, and so you think of like technologies like blockchain, which are kind of perfectly suited to our industry, but still actually only sort of limited to some of the sort of larger organizations. E-commerce platforms, again, it's something that has been ignored for years. Now everyone's starting to kind of do it, but we're all fragmented, and instead of having one Google for aviation, let's say, everyone and his friend have sort of started their own sort of marketplace, and it's kind of incredibly fragmented at the moment. So I'd say technology is sort of over the last sort of 10 years has been the major thing, and the rise, obviously going back to like sort of, Ryanair was, probably correct me, but probably early 80s, I'd say they started, and some of the first sort of low cost carriers emerged back then. And I'd say now over the last 10 years, we've seen a real sort of rise of low cost carriers, and emerging markets, travel becoming accessible to countries like Brazil, where such an enormous country lacks a solid road infrastructure. Places like Asia, where again you jump on a 747 from London to fly to Miami, they'll do like a 1 hour flight from Hong Kong to the mainland kind of thing in a 747. The demand over there is just eye-watering. There's low-cost carriers popping up every day kind of thing. So I'd say that has probably been the biggest thing, and obviously that creates pressure on the legacy operators, the BAs of the world, who have that kind of legacy overhead in terms of maintenance facilities, staffing, all the rest of it. So it creates sort of a competitive environment.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Interesting you mentioned the 747 after today BA announced they're retiring their fleet of, 30 odd 747s 4 years earlier than anticipated or planned.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a sad day for me. I mean, that not BA per se, but that aircraft is what kind of started it all for me. Is going off on a tangent, but my childhood, the first sort of decade of my life, was spent jumping on a Pan Am 747 back and forth from sort of London to Miami and stuff. My dad actually ran a company there at the time, and for me as a little kid, getting on this enormous machine was kind of what started it for me. And so to see that, we knew it was coming. Obviously, there's only a few operators sort of still utilising them, and they've actually hung on to them longer than originally forecast, mainly because of sort of lower fuel costs and things like that, which kind of makes it still a kind of viable option. And it's just a great aircraft and kind of cheap to maintain compared to some of the newer ones at the moment, of course. So it's a sad day, but people aren't flying. It's kind of we knew this was coming.
Yeah, and I was going to say with that and with what you mentioned about the low cost airlines and stuff, I think there's been many changes over the past 6 months with COVID wiping out some of the lower or the smaller aviational businesses. Like, how have you found it? I mean, what I'm imagining in my head as a guy that's not too keen on flying is that all the aircrafts have been sat there and they've been tinkering with them and fixing all the bits they've been putting off for years because they've been so busy.
Yes and no. I mean, so there's a number of things there. So I think, obviously, what I would say as a kind of opening comment on that is that our industry is incredibly resilient. We're a cyclical industry. We're used to peak ups and downs. This has been very different because, unlike, you take the last real sort of major kind of event for us was probably like 9/11 or ash clouds and all these things. There's always something, but you take 9/11, that was a fundamental shift in people like yourself, Mark, going, I don't want to get in on an aircraft. I don't want to put my family in danger, and this sort of artificial sort of nonsense that it's not safe and all the rest of it. So it's kind of that was just a kind of cultural shift in mentality and buying culture and all the rest of it. I think what we're seeing now is actually people having their hands cuffed and sort of that luxury of being able to jump on a plane, a safe, reliable aircraft, and fly to Spain, fly to the Maldives, fly to Miami, whatever. And actually these days for a really competitive price. And that's been sort of taken away from people. So I think that side of it is very much different. I think the demand is still there, but we've not been allowed to go. So then to the sort of maintenance side of it is, there are some people that are, I mean, obviously the airlines, aircraft only make money when they're flying passengers. That's their business. Everything else is a cost. An aircraft sat on the ground is just costing, it's hemorrhaging money, leasing fees, maintenance fees, parking fees, staff fees, every overhead you can imagine, fuel costs, ground support, it goes on and on and on and on. Airlines typically make a very small margin on their sales. It's especially someone like EasyJet, for example, it's a tiny number, and it's just getting that volume, bums on seats, putting it crudely, that actually gets to the magic number they need to. So airlines are all over this. They'll be aware of what aircraft they'll be are inefficient for their business model. So using the example you brought up of British Airways and the 747s, they'll get out of expensive leases and things that aren't sort of, obviously if they're cutting back to save kind of cost short term, they'll be looking at individual aircraft that they might be leasing that doesn't kind of fit with the rest of their kind of model. And basically a lot of I think what's really going to happen is at the moment where the volume's not there, people will push these really expensive heavy maintenance events, which cost tens of millions, almost per aircraft. They'll be pushing them to like next year. So I think this year is just going to be trying to kind of recover. And then I think we're going to get a massive wave of maintenance and stuff next year. But to your point, there will be airlines, of course, there are airlines. I know there's airlines that are doing sort of vital maintenance now so that they're kind of ready to get the capacity back up to close to what it was prior to COVID.
Yeah, interesting, and I as Mark said, it's sort of the same mindset that I had really. What are they doing? They don't just sort of put them into a garage and say, right, we'll bring them back out in a couple of months or so. But yeah, you think of maintenance. On the flip side, I'm not as bad as Mark that I have to be handcuffed or potentially have half a dozen beers to try and get onto a plane as well. So I'll go. So that was really interesting, and yeah, I agree with what Mark was saying. I was thinking that they would just be putting planes over the last 3 months into garages and getting them done. And unlike Mark, I don't need to be arrested or not arrested, handcuffed, should I say, and have half a dozen beers to be put onto a plane. I've lost my words.
I'm glad, thank you. You're a gentleman, made me feel better.
That's fine. So how have you had to adapt as a business? How have you had to change things over the last 6 months, essentially? Sorry, and what sort of opportunities have you found?
Yeah,
keep going.
So I think our core business is part sales activity. We buy, sell used, new rotables, consumables, expendables items, and we sell them to other traders like ourselves, repair facilities, banks, lessors, and airline operators. When lockdown restrictions kicked in, we're basically in the aftermarket where we reside. We're sort of feeding off the demand from the airlines primarily. And so when that sort of lockdown kind of initially kicked in, I remember actually sitting at my desk and the phone kept ringing, and friends that sort of in other companies, like you can see it in real time in the quotes that come through on our systems and the email activity and your phone ringing and stuff. People going, "Oh my God, it's fallen off a cliff." It's kind of like someone had just turned off the tap, and the normal demand that just kind of ticks over stops instantly. My girlfriend actually came into the room to talk to me at the time, and I think I looked sort of just absolutely white, and she was like, "You okay? You look like," and I was like, "Wow, this is real. This is like really kind of just hit home now." Being a West Ham fan, I'm sort of an eternal optimist, and I sort of was a bit naive originally. I was like, "Nah, it's all right. This isn't like 9/11. This is something we can deal with. It's not a fundamental shift in sort of things. It's fine." And then it really started hitting home, and so I had a little bit of a wobble for a few hours, and then I was like, "Right, this is not good," and kind of tore up the rule book and sort of turned it upside down and sort of said, "Right, okay, well, if the airlines aren't flying, the obvious thing for me is to focus on our friends at banks and lessors, that own assets, that lease them to the airlines. Because if you're an airline, typically you're not going to go and plummet hundreds or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into an aircraft to own it outright. These days you'll lease it, and especially if you're a low-cost carrier, that's typically the sort of model that they'll have to keep their costs down. And if you're not flying, people will be kind of panic returning aircraft, and that sends the financial institutions that lease those assets to them into kind of meltdown, because they're typically not really sort of set up to deal with that. They are commercial sort of finance organisations. Yes, they may have some sort of technical experts or engineers that work for them, but typically they will sort of go to sort of outside kind of consultants to help them out. And so I kind of then immediately sort of tore up the rule book and sort of just sort of basically wrote a new short-term business plan overnight, and sort of then just started hammering all our lessor contacts and some of our sort of friends that work in the sort of camo and management, technical sort of fleet management side of things, and really looked at how we could support that activity. And yeah, I mean, we've actually would not want to sound like we're gloating, but we've actually probably done about a year's worth of sales in the last 4 months as a result, and just been, so it's out there. You just got to create the opportunity and sort of change your approach, I think is basically.
Congrats.
Definitely. So with that change in business, what do you think the future holds on a global scale for aviation? Do you think stuff is going to slow down on the, maybe the maintenance side and the consultancy pick up more, or how do you see it changing moving forward?
For our business, or as in the industry as a whole?
I think both.
Yeah. No, I think for us, we basically right now is a lot of companies just went into sort of survival mode, and then so what do the next few months look like? It's obviously you sort of do whatever you need to do to survive, then you recover, and then it's sort of obviously building back up to. I think for aviation, we're not going to be up to. Like I say, we're a cyclical. We're used to this. This is bad, but we're a resilient industry. We're used to cycles, and it will build up quickly. I think we're seeing it already. Typically, it's going to be short-haul regional airlines that will pick up first, because if you think about it, it's as restrictions ease. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but as a manager, I'd be saying to my sort of sales guys, get on the road, tell everyone we're still here. By no means, we haven't gone away. If people owe us money, put payment plans in place. If it's new customers that are being less supported or serviced by people that are sort of have been struggling and failing to support them, that's where we need to go in and help them and serve them. So I think business travel, as always, will sort of help drive things. But then also people, I don't know about you guys, but I'm desperate to just get away and go on a short haul trip to sort of Spain or Greece or somewhere sort of close to home. Just an easy flight, take the family and get some sun and sort of relax. I don't know. But so I think short haul demand will sort of pick things up short term. And I think you'll see airlines adjusting their networks around that kind of demand short term. Then sort of as things pick up, obviously they'll sort of switch on the sort of the other routes and things in their network. But they will be everyone will be looking at routes that make money and those that don't, and they'll be sort of cutting back and adjusting and changing their business model. But I think then looking longer term, I think we're on the cusp of a really exciting era in we call it new aerospace, with the rise of eVTOL, electric powered aircraft, UAVs, and basically I think basically the Uber of the skies. It's going to be a totally different world in sort of 5 or 10 years time. It's already happening, and I think it's really exciting. There's massive changes to our infrastructure, not just, I mean, globally, countries will have to change their infrastructure. I mean, you look at what SpaceX are doing now with launching their massive, like, oh God, gone again. Sorry, I had a brain fart. What's Starlink? So I'll start that again.
That's fine. Just keep
going.
Yeah.
I think companies like SpaceX and what they're doing with their Starlink project are launching a number of sort of mass-produced satellites for sort of low orbit Wi-Fi connectivity, which is going to be essential for this next era of aviation. At the moment, if you think commercial aircraft operate in kind of high altitude corridors, and our kind of satellite communications and high frequency radio communication systems are all set up to reflect that. But what's going to be happening over the new sort of era of aviation is it's going to be low. We're going to have to change how we manage our airspace. We're going to have low altitude corridors of sort of traffic moving around, that's going to require a different sort of infrastructure in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity, air traffic control, maintenance. So there's a lot going on now, and I think it's going to be a very different world very quickly in sort of 5 or 10 years.
It sounds like obviously it's gonna barrel roll, like you said. There's so much that's gonna have to change and that will change and adapt, and everything else is gonna be it's gonna be really interesting to see obviously those changes. And as you said, I'm in exactly the same boat as you, that really keen to just get on a short haul flight, get away, and all this sort of stuff. I don't know about if Mark is very as keen as us too, but Mark will probably screaming. Yeah, he'll probably take the boat from Withering and travel across if he had to. So, yeah. Well, look, Louis, that's the business end of the questions, we say. So we're going to go into a couple of fun questions before we end this episode today. But so first one from me: what profession other than your own would you have liked to have attempted?
Wow. Well, assuming being a pub customer doesn't count as a profession, I'd probably say I do kick myself. I think the one big regret I have is that I didn't see out the military. I've always wanted to have a long stint in the military. I think probably would have done me some good. My girlfriend would probably agree. But no, I do wish I had kind of gone through longer term in my sort of piloting and flying. But I also had a weird desire to. That's all right. I can see Mark wincing. I had a weird desire to work. I don't know if it was that film with Kevin Costner with the Coast Guard or whatever it was, with hanging out of a helicopter on a winch. I fancied doing that, but I don't really know, to be honest. I think
action and adventure. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Both sound like they involve some sort of aircraft.
Yeah, it's when the glamour of aircraft maintenance gets too much, you need that sort of thrill and excitement. So.
Definitely good choices. So obviously, as our show's called The Global Guys, we ask everyone that comes on to choose their guy. We've had quite a few different people chosen over the series. I've had a couple of votes, would you believe? Not sure Tom's had one yet.
No.
David Attenborough, Bolt, Beckham. So, who's your favourite global guy, Louis?
And just to be clear, what is the definition of a? It's not one of you two. It can be
anyone.
Well, it can be one of us.
It can be. I know you'd like that, Tom, wouldn't you?
But we're just someone that you have been inspired, I suppose, by, or something from growing up, or who you look as a bit of an icon type thing.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, just to rest assured, I'm going to be diplomatic here, so it's neither of you two. I don't want an argument on Friday afternoon. There's a number. It's a tricky one to decide, but there's a few candidates here. I'd say my dad has pretty much taught me everything I know about sales and sort of challenging yourself and management, body language, networking. You should get him on next, actually. He's better than me, and he won't fluff his lines. But and I've had some amazing bosses that have inspired me over the years. I've got a very interesting story about one of them. I don't know if we've got time for it. But otherwise, I'd have to say my mate Eddie Thompson in Miami. We got thrown together in a company that worked at GA Telesis in Miami, and he was like this typical fat, funny guy American, or thought he was. And I was just like, who is this guy? He's doing my head in. And he was, I now know, thinking the same thing. Who's this arrogant young guy that thinks he knows it all in his skinny jeans coming in here? And we got off on the wrong foot, but actually now he's one of my best mates, and I talk to him every day. So Eddie Thompson, you are my global guy.
Oh, good. Nice. Well, you'll have to tag him in once we put this all over the platforms. Yeah, when we release this episode. Well, Louis, it's been an absolute pleasure, and also really, really interesting to understand. The aviation industry is something that possibly people don't really see or understand underneath the, should we say, the media view that we get. So it's really interesting to get an understanding of how your world looks, and also potentially what your world will look like going forwards. And really pleasing over the last 6 months, especially, that you've been able to find new opportunities and new sales and everything else, and that's been really good. So for everyone that's listening, Louis' details we will put on all the platforms that we release this out on our LinkedIn, on our YouTube, Spotify, on Apple. So please subscribe, have a look, and link up with Louis to follow his continuous journey. From one half of the Global Guys, Louis, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.